So after getting all of my lumber milled, I take it over to my table saw and start cutting everything to length. Next, I marked out the curves for the top rails of the headboard and the footboard, and gang cut them at my bandsaw. I chose to cut them both out at the same time to try to keep them as close to the same shape as possible so that when I refine the curves later, it'll be a lot easier to keep things consistent. Next, I took the top rails for the headboard and the footboard over to my bench and used my record circular plane to sort of finesse those curves a little bit and get things to a more pleasing shape. Next, I used my random orbit sander to finish smoothing everything out. Next, I started cutting the joinery where the vertical style of the headboard will meet the bottom rail of the headboard and footboard. And then I could glue the tenons into that vertical style. Next, I started to lay out the joinery for the mortise and tenon where that vertical style will meet the top rail of the headboard and footboard. So I cut out as much of this on the band saw as I possibly could, but since this has a curved shoulders to the tenon, I wasn't able to use the band saw for all of it. After cutting as much material away at the bandsaw as I could, I turned to a combination of hand saws and chisels to remove the remaining waste from the tenons. With the tenons more or less cut, I started to remove the waste from the mortise using a Forstner bit and my hand drill. And then it was back to some chisel work to clean out the rest of the mortise. And then with a little bit of test fitting and finessing, I was able to get a pretty tight joint here with this curved mortise and tenon. Next, I started working on the panels for the headboard and footboard by gluing the stock up to create them. With the panels gluing up, I turned my attention to the 4 legs of the bed, and I cut these out at the table saw and squared them up over at my planer. Next, I used my power planer to clean up the glue lines in the panels. Next, I used my track saw to clean up the edges of the headboard and footboard where they will join to the legs. Next, I laid the headboard and footboard on top of the panels and drew out the shape that I would need to cut the panels to eventually make them fit inside the rails and stiles of the headboard and footboard. After getting the inside shape, I took a compass and drew a line a 1/4 inch away from that line, and this is the line I'll actually cut on. Next, I took the panels over to my bandsaw and cut out all the curves. And I used my track saw to cut out all of the straight lines. Next, I pre-stained all of my panels to prevent seeing parts of them that haven't been stained as they expand and contract through the seasons. Next, I used a rabbiting bit in my router to cut a groove in the rails and stiles of the headboard and footboard that will accept the panels that we just cut out and stained. And I used my domino to cut the joinery where the headboard and footboard will connect to the legs. Next, I used a straight bit in my router to cut a groove that will accept the sides of the panels. And then it was time to start assembling the headboard and the footboard. Before gluing on the legs, I decided that a decorative chamfer on the tops of the legs was in order. I'm glad I did this. I think it's a nice touch. And then it was time to glue on the legs. Next, I cut the mortises where the rails of the bed will connect to the headboard and footboard. After that was done, I glued on the strip to the rails that will support the slats for the bed. and then I drilled some pocket holes to finish up the joinery for the rail to headboard or footboard connections. With all the building done, and after giving everything a pretty thorough sanding, I stained the rest of the bed the same way I did the panels, using General Finishes Java Gel Stain. And once the stain had dried, I applied 5 coats of shellac as the finish for the bed. And now it's time to put everything together. I've been using this method of construction for beds for a number of years now, and I think it's the easiest that I've come up with. The mortise and tenons, you can see, fit very snugly together, and they provide the strength for the bed, and the pocket hole screws really just kind of hold everything together. It's really easy, and it's worked for me for a number of years now. I'd like to say thank you to Lisa for sponsoring this video. I've been sleeping on a Lisa mattress for about a year now, and it's an amazing mattress. They're not too firm, they're not too soft, and they're just super comfortable. If you're interested in picking up a new mattress for yourself, use the link below, down in the description, to get $130 off your next mattress purchase at lisa.com. Thanks, Lisa. And here's the finished bed, all made up and looking sharp.